Question 26 and 27 from the SAT number 9, April 2017. So 26 and 27, we notice are paired questions, which means we're going to start with the question for 26, and then we're going to basically use the answer choices from 27 to try to figure out which one of those could answer our question from 26. So 26 says, based on the passage, Botka, I'm going to say Botka, I think that's right. Botka and Levison's conclusions would be most weakened by a study that something. So then we have to look through the answer choices for 27, and what we're going to be doing is looking for the answer choices that will tell us about basically which of their conclusions could be weakened by one of those answer choices. Now, actually, the way that I'm going to start with this is I want to figure out what Botka and Levinson's basic idea or what their basic conclusion is before I go any further. Because we could start by going through the answer choices for 27, but what I'm confused about is we might be looking for an answer choice in 27 that tells us about sort of like a pivotal assumption or a pivotal like essential component to their argument, and then we're going to choose the scenario that would contradict that central component, right? Or we could be looking for an answer choice that actually tells us about something directly that their conclusion could be weakened by. Whatever the case is, I feel more comfortable and I feel like I'm more likely to get the right answer if I can go back and sort of really understand at least somewhat what their theories are about, what their conclusion is about. So that's going to be in this paragraph here. We have the first mention of them, and it's just going to end on this paragraph here. And we can find that just by scanning for their name, also noting that this is line 34. All of these texts are in that paragraph, and this is line 60. So between 34 and 60, that's where we're going to be looking. So let's just go real quickly through what their argument is. So they led a pair of studies which supports the idea of refugees from the outer solar system orbiting in the asteroid belt. So if you remember from this passage and from the other questions, basically this is what is called the NICE model, which means that Uranus and Neptune were way out in the outer solar system. Then they came inwards and they dragged a bunch of like icy objects with them, including Ceres, right? So what they did is these two researchers, they focused on the so-called D and P-type asteroids. D and P-type asteroids that comprise 20% of the population in the outer part of the belt. Right? These objects are a dark reddish color that suggests they're covered in carbon-rich gunk, just the sort of residue that might have been left behind on an icy object that had its outermost layer vaporized in the bright sunlight. So basically, they're focusing on the specific type of asteroid in the asteroid belt, which is in the inner solar system. Don't be confused by this. Outer part of the belt, inner part of the solar system. They're focusing on these types of asteroids. They're about 20% of all the asteroids that are there. And what's special about them is they have this dark reddish color, which suggests that they used to be icy objects in the outer solar system. They were dragged inwards and they had it burned off, right, by the sunlight. So what they did is they used computer simulations to show that the observed number of objects is about right if they are immigrants, meaning they used computer simulations, they looked and they said, okay, the amount of objects in the asteroid belt that are these D and P type objects is about what you would expect if the theory was true. But one thing is they have assumed many of the objects broke up after transport. Basically, basically they have an assumption that as objects came in, a lot of them broke up as they moved in, and that's what helped confirm their theory. I pay attention to this part here, this assumption part. Usually when we're talking about like a scientific passage, any sort of assumption or any sort of inference or something that they're depending on is probably going to be important. It usually comes to play, but we don't know for sure. So that's basically their idea. Now let's go through the answer choices and try to figure out what might be weakened, right? What could weaken their study? And let's look through A, B, C, and D for either something that's pivotal in their experiment or for something that would suggest what could make it wrong. So A is lines 39 through 41, which is here, starting Botka and Hal Levinson of SWRI led a pair of studies which support the idea of refugees from the outer solar system orbiting in the asteroid belt. This is not a great answer choice for what we want because all it's doing is introducing the two researchers and explaining that they led this study. It's not giving us any evidence about either the foundation of what their conclusion is based on, nor is it giving any sort of hint or suggestion about what would make their conclusion weakened, right, or wrong. So A is not a good answer choice. B is 42 through 44, which says here, they focus on the so-called D and P-type asteroids that comprise 20%, etc. This is actually kind of continuing like answer choice A in the sense that it's just describing more of the methodology, more of what their research and their experiment is. This case is telling us what they focused on, but again, it's not telling us any sort of conclusion, any sort of assumption or foundation on which their argument is built, nor any sort of hint or suggestion about what could make it wrong. So that means that this answer choice is going to be wrong as well. Then we get 44 through 49. These objects are a dark reddish color that suggests they are covered in carbon-rich gunk, just the sort of residue that might have been left behind on an icy object that had its outermost layers vaporized in the bright sunlight of the inner solar system. Now, this could possibly be an answer choice because maybe, for instance, we find out, right, they're depending on this idea that these objects are dark reddish color because they had their ice, sort of the icy exterior, outermost layers were burned off. So this answer choice could work because maybe we find out that that's actually not true, right? But the problem I have with that is that it's not very direct, right? It's not directly contradicting their argument. This sentence here is more so explaining a little bit of their reasoning, right? And they're not even 100% making the claim that that they have to have had their icy objects or icy outermost layer burned off. It's just basically saying this dark reddish color suggests that it might be. So for those reasons, it doesn't strike me as too strong of an answer choice, although we could keep it. But I would actually end up eliminating it when we compare it to answer choice D, which is 49 to 53. One I already highlighted. It says Botka and Levinson's computer simulations show that the observed number of objects is about right if they are immigrants, though they have assumed many of the objects broke up after transport. So this is telling us about some of their findings, right? And it is telling us about the fact that their findings depend on this assumption. We already said that assumptions tend to be pretty important when you're dealing with scientific passages, really sort of any passage on the SAT, but especially scientific passages when we have an assumption on which a conclusion or a finding is found. So that means that this is probably going to be our answer choice. And basically, they have assumed that many objects broke up after transport. So if we say that some objects didn't, we find out that objects didn't break up after transport, it would weaken their argument. So A for 26 says, they confirmed that heat from the sun burned away the outer layers of all immigrant objects. So would this weaken their argument? We should say no. One, none of the answer choices let's take that back. Answer choice C does talk about the sun burning away the outermost layer, but A would actually sort of confirm their argument because their argument depends to some degree on the fact that the sun burned away that outermost layer. So A would actually sort of confirm their argument to begin with. So I don't think A is a good option. We should eliminate A because it wouldn't weaken their argument. B says, if they establish that the orbits of certain objects of the inner solar system were once less stable. Without thinking too deeply, we should eliminate this option, because none of the texts really talk about this fact about the stability of objects in the inner solar system, whether they are or are not stable. Because they're not even talked about, we shouldn't even give it the time of day to think about it. That's how you solve these questions efficiently. I would eliminate it right off the bat. But if we want to take one step deeper, we could say, basically what this sentence is saying is, if the objects in the inner solar system were once less stable, that would weaken their argument. But their argument doesn't depend on the stability of objects in the inner solar system being unstable. It does depend on, or being stable, it does depend on objects maybe in the outer solar system being less stable, so they could be dragged by Uranus and Neptune. But B has nothing to do with the conclusion that we're talking about, so we can eliminate B. C says, if we demonstrated that very few objects broke up after migrating to the asteroid belt, that would weaken their argument. This does match answer choice C, which we just looked at, 44 through 49. No, excuse me, the last one here, answer choice D. Let's get rid of this one. Yeah, it would match answer choice D, which is what we already said, right? If the objects, they're assuming that the object broke up after transport. So if it turns out they actually didn't, that would definitely weaken their argument. C is a good answer choice. D says they proved that not all immigrants from the outer solar system survive in the asteroid belt today. Again, this is not something that is mentioned on the surface of the text, meaning it's just not about this, so we shouldn't think too deeply. Nothing in the text that we read talk about immigrants from the outer solar system surviving the asteroid belt today, whether or not that matters. So for that reason, we can get rid of D. Basically, if we want to go deeper, basically what it's saying is that if they showed that not every immigrant from the outer solar system survived in the asteroid belt today, that would weaken their argument. This actually would confirm their argument because this is an assumption that they have. They assume that many objects broke up after transport. So objects from the outer solar system, they don't survive in the outer asteroid belt today. That's actually an assumption they make. So D is wrong as well, which is going to leave us with answer choice C for our correct answer for this question.